Thank you, Madison, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here with my colleague Chrissy Boyes to present on Cornell Botanic Gardens native lawn. Next slide, please. Our current urban and suburban landscapes are dominated by lawns composed of non-native grasses, which are labor-intensive and require substantial energy inputs in the form of fossil fuels, fertilizers, and pesticides. Requiring significant amounts of energy to create, nitrogen fertilizer is a leading polluter of our waterways, where excessive application and runoff promotes algal blooms, which then eventually decompose, promoting anoxic conditions and starving freshwater life of essential oxygen. Excess nitrogen also plays a role in promoting and increasing the toxicity of harmful algal blooms. The maintenance of our manicured lawns also requires considerable amounts of fossil fuels, helping exacerbate climate change. Next slide, please. To help change this paradigm, the Botanic Gardens embarked on an ambitious project to create a native plant-dominated lawn. This native lawn demonstration project aimed to create a shift in how we design and landscape our homes and public green spaces, and ultimately advance sustainability itself. This project converted a non-native grass and weed lawn to a low maintenance, low energy input, and high biodiversity sustainable lawn. Our goals were simple and focused on maintaining or even enhancing the traditional aesthetic of a turf lawn. We wanted it to be able to tolerate a moderate amount of trampling and wanted to minimize watering, eliminate fertilizer and pesticide inputs, and require minimal hand weeding. We also wanted to significantly curtail carbon dioxide emissions by only mowing it once to twice a year. One primary measure of success was if it were to consist of at least 85% native cover, native plant species cover, and to increase the overall biodiversity of pollinators and other fauna. Next slide, please.
Our project was inspired by Danthonia species, or poverty oak grasses.
Next slide.
Locally, we have both Danthonia spicata and Danthonia compressa, which are both widely distributed, with compressa growing in the eastern third of North America and spicata growing in nearly every state and province. Each are low-growing, cool season or C3 grasses that are highly drought adapted. Mature plant heights have basal leaves up to 12 centimeters tall and flower stalks up to 30 centimeters. Our plant palette was also inspired from sun-loving native plants that grow widely along seasonal and abandoned roads, old cemeteries, and power line cuts, through otherwise intact forests in central New York. Next slide. We also found inspiration in New York's Alvars, or pavement barrens, plant communities, such as this one, the Chameau Barrens Preserve in Jefferson County, owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy.
Our project needed a home, and we selected an existing turf area within the Cornell Botanic Gardens Mundi Wildflower Garden here at Cornell University in Ithaca. Next. Here's an early spring 2007 photograph of our project site, which measures approximately 3,000 square feet. We intentionally selected a location with a slight south aspect at less than a 3% grade to help make the site slightly drier. The uphill side is bounded by a native perennial planting and the southern edge by a roadside and shallow ditch. Next. We then developed an overall work plan and schedule. Site preparation began in 2008 in the early fall with a glyphosate application to the turf, followed by the removal of sod with small equipment. We then amended the clay loam soil with 2 inches of sand lightly incorporated into the site. Next. Danthonia and other native graminoid and forb seeds were collected locally under power line cuts in old cemeteries, old roadbeds, and adjacent fields. Seeds were then cleaned using a brush machine and clipper cleaners to remove awns. Seeds to be broadcast were mixed with sawdust and were cold, moist stratified for 60 days. Next. Seeds for propagation were sown in February in 10 by 20 inch flats with a cold, moist stratification of 40 degrees for 60 days in a commercial pro mix. The Danthonia were also grown in pots with a mix of expanded shale and an all-purpose peat. Next. We developed a schematic planting design that included some experimental variables. These included various combinations of seeding rates, seeds only, and plugs only. Next. We also designed in some elements for some specialty plants. These included moss phlox, Phlox subulata, bluets, Houstonia caerulea, pussy toes, Antenaria neglecta and Plantagenifolia, and prairie drop seed, Sporobolus heterolepis. These species are all low growing and provide additional diversity, interest, and color. Next. In all, we planted 11 grasses and sedges that met our criteria of being native, low growing, and drought adapted. 2 species, Bromus altissimus and Elymus hystrix, were included to help act as a placeholder native cover crop for an adjacent second phase of work to be done in 2012. Of these 11, all but one, Poa alsoides, have persisted and remain in the planting today. Next. We selected 10 native forbs that also met our criteria of being native, low growing, drought adapted, and of value for pollinators and other insects. The eastern prickly pear cactus, which yes, is native to parts of New York, was planted for a bit of whimsy for visitors, and unlike the rest of the native lawn, is not advised to walk on. All but 3, Aquilegia canadensis columbine, Geranium maculatum, wild geranium, and Houstonia caerulea bluets, established and remain today. We also recently added Fragaria virginiana, wild strawberry, and harebell, Campanula rotundifolia. Next. The planting zones were delineated in the field. Recommended seeding rates were between 1,000 to 3,000 seeds per square foot. Our seed supply was limited, so one zone was planted at 660 seeds per square foot and a second zone at 1,425 seeds per square foot. We chose 2 rates to help determine if there would be any differences between the areas long term. The seeds were sown in mid-April to early May 2009, then watered in for good seed to soil contact. Next. We had good initial germination for all seeding rates and good establishment within 2 months. Long term, we found no differences between the cover based on seeding rates or differences with the plugs. Next. By May of that same year, our seedlings that were started in the greenhouse were ready to be transplanted. Next. This includes the Danthonia spicata individuals that were grown in expanded shale and peat mix. Next. Seedlings were then outplanted and watered as needed in the first year to promote establishment. Next.
The lawn was filling in by the following April, but gaps remained between planted plugs. Next. But by June, the lawn was filling in well. Next. That July, we had a bit of a setback and confirmed a fungal outbreak that set back some of the Danthonia population. We did end up treating the outbreak successfully with a fungicide and had good seedling recruitment of Danthonia spicata later that year. This was the only time we had to use a fungicide on this project. Our only herbicide use was a small experimental glyphosate treatment on Kentucky bluegrass that was unsuccessful and given up on. By the fall of that year, the area with the fungal outbreak had nearly fully recovered. Next. The following season had a good crop of Danthonia seeds, so we opted to delay our typical mowing to allow for seed harvest for additional expansion for the following year. Our typical mowing regime is to cut the area in early June and again in late August to promote short stature fall flowering forbs. Next.
For site preparation for our second phase, this area had been sprayed and scraped in 2009, then planted with native grasses as a placeholder. We then opted to use a weed barrier fabric to solarize the cover crop and weeds and eliminate competing vegetation in the fall of 2011. Next. For the soil amendment, we opted to test using 2 inches of stone dust rather than sand to amend the clay loam soil, increase drainage, and determine if that more locally sourced material would be equally effective as an amendment. We tried to copy the seeding rates from the 2009 planting, but unfortunately had to reduce the rate by about 50% due to lack of seeds. We planted the site in late June and covered it with a remay fabric as a shade structure, as that spring and early summer were quite hot and dry. Next. We did have to do some hand weeding, particularly during the first 2 establishment years. We tried to limit non-native species such as white clover, trifolium repens. Although it is a great pollinator plant and we love to promote it in traditional turf grass lawns, as a legume, we wanted to limit it fixing and adding nitrogen to the soil and becoming a dominant species. We also continue to selectively hand weed invasive species such as thistles and woody shrubs, but spend significantly less time doing that than we would be mowing if it were still turf. Next.
Now I'd like to mention a few details on some specific plants included in the lawn. The first is prairie dropseed, Sporobolus heterolepis. This is a very attractive tough grass with very deep root system. It does form small tussocks, so it's best to be included out of the main paths for walking and on a border. Next. And here's prairie dropseed with its fall color. Next. Hairy beard tongue, Penstemon hirsutus, is a great pollinator plant that does tolerate mowing well. Next. The lovely bluets, Houstonia caerulea, that did very well early on, unfortunately did not persist for more than 3 years. We suspect that it didn't fare well under the intense interspecific competition that developed as the native lawn grew in. Next. We also included Carex pennsylvanica, Pennsylvania sedge. This is a very common woodland species found in dry oak forest that also grows rhizomatously. Next. Another sedge we included is Carex tonsa, or shaved sedge, shown in the upper right photograph. The 2 species of pussy toes, Antonaria neglecta and Plantagenifolia, initially did very well, but have reduced their abundance over time due to shading from the larger plants. Next. As many native systems, the plant community and its appearance changes over the course of the year. Here's an early spring photo. The pink here is moss phlox and the white flowers are the pussy toes inflorescence. Next. The grasses dominate in the summer, with Danthonia flowering culms and spikelets being the tallest stems visible here. Next. Autumn brings added color, mainly from asters that have grown spontaneously in the native lawn, having seeded in from the adjoining native landscape garden. Next. Here we are in the fall of 2020, its 11th year, after skipping that year's mowing due to the pandemic. Next. Even the native lawn's winter plumage has variable hues and structure of interest. Next. And the added duff layer helps insulate the ground and overwintering insect community. Next.
Given the novel nature of the native lawn, we developed interpretations so visitors can learn about the environmental cost of traditional lawns and the value of native plants. We have also added the project to our Sustainable Landscapes Trail and self-guided tours. Next. So by many measures, we have met our original goals: aesthetics, trampling, infrequent mowing, no fertilizer, and no watering. We principally met the no pesticide goal, except for the one-time use of a fungicide and the experimental glyphosate treatment on Kentucky bluegrass. We also observed over a 10-fold increase in insect diversity and abundance, so we definitely met that goal. And now that the lawn is in maintenance mode, we also spend very little time hand weeding, with only a few hours spent annually. Next. So now in 2022, what does the native lawn consist of, and where are we on our remaining goal of 85% native species cover? We have all the originally planted species, except those previously noted. We also have 6 native graminoids that have established spontaneously from the adjoining natural area or the seed bank, including the ubiquitous path rush, Juncus tenuis, 2 low-growing sedges, and 2 species of attractive and low-growing Muhlenbergia. We also have 6 non-native grasses. Not surprisingly, we have some Kentucky bluegrass that has crept in, but it is at low densities. We have 2 species of agrostis, which are also low-growing and attractive. Also appearing spontaneously is Anthoxanthum odoratum, or sweet vernal grass, which acts much like the Danthonia. Next. For forbs and woody plants, we have 29 species that have established spontaneously from the adjoining natural area or seed bank. This includes a number of violet species, some aggressive goldenrods that we keep in check with mowing, several woodland asters, including calico, heart-leafed, and frost aster. We also have Lobelia syphilitica, or great blue lobelia, which is an attractive, valuable pollinator species. We also found a few weedy native species and our native grape and red cedar for spontaneous woodland plants, woody plants. Next. And for non-native forbs and woody plants, we've identified 21 species. These include several turf weeds, such as chickweed, black medic, plantain, self-heal, and dandelion. We also have several common weeds of old fields and roadsides, such as Queen Anne's lace, hawkweed, and common St. John's wort. For invasive non-native species, we found a population of Canadian thistle and a small amount of multiflora rose. Next. For the goal to have 85% native plant cover, we surveyed the native lawn this past July to determine the cover of Danthonia species, other native species cover, non-native species, bare ground, and litter. We found more Danthonia in the sand treatment at around 12% cover, while it was about half that in the stone dust. The cover of non-native species was higher in the stone dust at 20% and only 13% in the sand. Cover of litter, other native species were other native species were nearly identical between the treatments, and the sand treatment had a bit more bare ground at 12% than the stone dust. We speculate that some of these differences may be due to differences in pH between the soil amendments, with the more calcareous stone dust amended soil having a pH of 8.2 and the more acidic sand treatment with a lower pH at 7.6. The lower seeding rate for the 2012 stone dust planting may also have affected the outcome. Overall, the sand treatment did meet our goal of 85% native cover, while we came close, but a bit short of the goal for the stone dust treatment. Next. As for future directions we may go, we hope to receive grant funding to pursue evaluating carbon sequestration rate differences between traditional turf, low-mow turf, and the native lawn. Beyond the carbon savings from the reduced mowing, we expect many of these deep-rooted species would sequester significantly more carbon than other traditional lawns. We also hope to inventory the underground invertebrate community to compare it with traditional lawns. Ultimately, we would love to see the native lawn scaled up beyond a demonstration site to become more widely used. To do so, seed production for Danthonia and other dominant species in the lawn will need to be expanded commercially. Next.
Lessons learned. Danthonia species is a winner as a dominant matrix species. Sandier, drier, higher pH, and lower nutrients is better. Don't skimp on seeds. Diversity is good, so add more plants. Many non-natives are tolerable and some advantageous. Low-growing prostrate plants require additional mowing. If you build it, they will certainly come. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you both so much for the presentation. This was really informative, and I bet that many of us will be using these tips. Again, thank you to everyone for being very patient with the tech difficulties. And now I'll be reading some questions off from the chat in order from when they came in. So everyone, please type any last minute questions in the chat box if you have any now. So the first question is, for the prickly pears, were there any special steps necessary for them to survive the winters?
No, none at all. They're perfectly hardy here. They just like good drainage.
And they were put in the sand treatment area as part of that.
Yeah, they're perched up above one of those little rock ledges.
Great, great. And the next question is, now that we'll have access to all the species names, where can we source the seeds?
Which seeds?
They did not specify, so I'll give them time to respond and then we can move on.
We have seeds here. I can just answer that directly. That there is a seed library here. It's available to the public. If you are a member of the Finger Lakes Native Plant Society, you get a seed list because we collaborate with them. So every December, by the end of the month, there's a seed list that is sent out to members.
And along with that information, it has additional information on germination requirements, plant stature, flowering times, and other things to help you propagate. But I would say, there are some other seed nurseries and commercial nurseries that provide grown plants that are available. We often use Ernst Nursery in northern Pennsylvania. It overlaps significantly with our area and our local ecotype seeds up here in the Allegheny Plateau. So knowing where your kind of ecoregion is and making sure you're getting seed from those areas is highly advisable. And because you could go to Prairie Moon Nursery in Minnesota and find a lot of these species, but they're Minnesota ecotypes and they may not do well here. So that would be a couple of those places to look for some native seeds.
As far as downstate, the Long Island Plant Initiative, Native Plant Initiative, is doing a great job. And I think there are a few others down that way, but that's the one that stands out in my mind right now.
That's great. Thank you both for showing that resource. And next, the next question is, if we'd like to visit a native garden for inspiration on designing our own lawns, are there any public examples you would recommend?
This one.
Well, beyond the native lawn, we have a lot of other native landscape and gardening plantings here in the Mundy Wildflower Garden. We also have a pollinator garden we call the Buzzline that identifies a number of both native and non-native but non-invasive plants that are beneficial for pollinators. So those would be a couple places here that would potentially be of interest in learning about native plant gardening. We also have a lot of resources on our website, cornellbotanicgardens.org, about a lot of those gardens, as well as a plant locator if you wanted to look for where specific plants are in the landscape. That could be used to direct you to those particular locations if you're interested in pursuing it from a species perspective.
There's also a stream bank restoration area in the Mundy Wildflower Garden that demonstrates the use of native grasses and other forbs in gravel.
That's great. Thank you both. And yes, someone sent me a chat that says the Broccolo Garden Center in Rochester does these gardens as well. So
Great.
That's interesting. And the next question is, if you live in the city of Albany, what are the best low maintenance plants for basic ground cover? Minimal weeding and mowing, but needs to stay short enough to deter mice from building nests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so any of our native grasses and some of the interesting forbs that would fill in the gaps between them. And you can mow them at any height you choose. So that's just a personal preference as to whether you're going to mow it or not mow it. But they'll flower at a very short stature. So they're there for the pollinators, and they're amenable to us as well.
So I would mention, it's less, if you have a traditional turf grass lawn, it is highly likely that it has got a rich silt, loam, black loam soil, which is not the soil types that we have here and not what is in the native lawn. But if you used the Albany pine bush as an example of what native plants could live in that Albany region, and you have a sandy silt soil, then you could use the plants in the Albany pine bush to create your native lawn and your native landscaping, and be very beneficial and obviously locally, local plant communities. So that's a really great reference model to use if you wanted to try to do your own native lawn with native plants from the Albany region.
That's great, thank you. And do you have any tips on seed collection?
Sure. Follow the plants. If you find populations, one, you have to know the rules. So that would be the first thing. And there's no collecting through the state forest. So this must be on, if you're going to go out and collect, you must collect on private land. And then you need to find the plants and just follow their bloom period, watch them. Some species want to be collected early and green, others dry. There's some information out there through the New England Wildflower Society was a first. Bill Kalina wrote some really good books on native plant propagation. Or again, check the Finger Lakes Native Plant Society website, or contact me directly about seed collecting. If anyone is ever interested in volunteering, you can contact our volunteer coordinator. And that's what I do with volunteers annually. So we collect seeds from June to December.
So another good rule of thumb is to not collect more than 10% of the available seeds in a particular area to make sure that it's sustainably being collected. You don't want to negatively impact the source population. It's really important for following that rule for annuals and biennials, because you can very easily deplete a population very quickly if you're over collecting those species. Perennials are a little bit more forgiving. That is, seed storage is also a key thing, making sure that you don't allow your seeds that you've collected to get moldy. Dry seeds like to be kept dry, and moist seeds like to be kept moist. So a few things to follow there.
Great, thank you for answering that. And the next question is, do you have any advice for treatment of our lawns in light of the heat wave and relative drought we are currently experiencing?
Just enjoy not having to mow.
Well, I saw a video the other day, a new campaign that's out there called Kill Your Lawn. So it might be the right time to convert to a native lawn, given that we are experiencing those kinds of situations. But, I mentioned it earlier. If you do have a traditional lawn and you want to keep it, I highly advise that you mix it in with white clover. The clover acts as adding nitrogen to the soil, so it fertilizes it, so it keeps the graminoids in there a bit healthier. It completely tolerates mowing, and it's a really valuable pollinator plant. And so if that's the only thing you do, and you don't spray herbicides on your lawn, and you have Kentucky bluegrass and white clover in it, it'll be a healthier lawn long term and more beneficial to the environment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And another question, we got many questions today. We were told that butterfly bushes would be good to plant, but then saw an article that they can be invasive. Is it that they're only invasive in some areas or all?
I do not advise butterfly bush. It does grow spontaneous. It's not horrible like Japanese knotweed or swallowwort. It's not in that category, but it does spread. And there's so many other beautiful native shrubs, many that are flowering and provide pollinator benefits that are good alternatives. So I would say you're not really doing a favor to butterflies with butterfly bush. You want to make some suggestion of alternates?
Think butterfly weed instead, Asclepias tuberosa. Yeah, alternates to butterfly bush could be if you have a moist area, Clethra alnifolia, which isn't exactly native here, but is not invasive at all. It's a southern sweet shrub, I think is its common name. All the dogwoods, they're so easy to grow, the shrubby dogwoods, and they provide high fat quality nutrition for birds who are planning right now to start thinking about migrating again, south. So that's the food that you want to provide for them. The viburnums, so any of the nanny berry, you can eat nanny berry too. They're sometimes called wild raisin. Yeah, dogwood, viburnum, plethora, Physocarpus, nine bark. If we're talking shrubs and others, many others. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. And something that was asked a few times was that has this been used for outreach to other institutions to encourage transitions elsewhere?
That's kind of part of what this webinar is for. So we did put a lot of information on our website, cornellbotanicgardens.org, and you navigate to the Mundy Wildflower Garden page. There's a whole section in there on our native lawn. There has not been a huge amount of outreach that we've done for this yet, but we're certainly happy to work with others in that regard.
Great. Yeah, that seems like a great opportunity for people who have a lot of questions. They seem very interested in talking to you. So another question is, can you recommend a good ground cover for sandy soils?
I don't work specifically with sand. I'd love to. I would check again Todd's recommendation to look at the Albany pine bush as a reference site. That would be perfect. So if you're near there, or you can find them on the web, I know they have a demonstration garden too. Plus, paths, a trail network through the pine bush. So that's a wonderful place to go and find out about growing in sand.
I would add, ground covers in general. One of the reasons that they are ground cover is that they are invasive and smothering. They often are species that are growing clonally and covering an entire area. So if you actually have that, you could regret it, because those kinds of things can spread and dominate areas. Almost all of the commercially available horticultural ground covers are invasive in natural areas. You're thinking about vincas, Ranunculus vicaria, the list goes on. So I like diversity. Ground covers are kind of the monoculture paradigm that I think we as a society should be looking at other models.
Great, thank you. And it seems like a lot of people are working with varying soils around here. So do you have any recommendations for a seed mix that could be introduced into a traditional turf grass setting? Well, they said that they would like to seed or plant plugs in areas to hopefully transition what are usually mulch ring areas around lawn trees.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, we've been working with that idea here as well, calling it living mulch. So yes, any of the species that that we mentioned in this would work just as well in a mulch ring. Plus, all of the asters, any of the what I call civilized goldenrods, the short stature goldenrods, Solidago bicolor, Solidago flexicalis, Solidago caesia, they only get to about 2 feet tall and under, and would tolerate, even if you wanted to, you could actually mow. You can mow any of these plants, and their basal rosettes will hold up to that. So yeah, the sedges, there's some really nice dry loving carex out there that would work well in the mulch ring. So you could have a combination of something that was grasses, sedges, forbs, all under in your understory.
And just to add on to that, when we talk about mowing, it's not mowing like you traditionally mow your lawn. We are mowing it higher, 8 to 10 inches tall if possible. You don't want to mow it an inch high, then that would be detrimental to the plants. But as Chrissy was mentioning, a lot of the native plants that are growing that we added originally and that are growing spontaneously would do well in those conditions, with the exceptions of these aggressive goldenrods. So that was the Solidago canadensis and altissimus. Those are rhizomatous goldenrods that are pretty much ubiquitous, and they're pretty aggressive. Even though they're native and they're good for insects, pollinator plant, and so on, you don't want just to allow that really to get established, because it can become a dominant that then keeps a lot of the other diversity out of a particular areas. But the other goldenrods that Chrissy mentioned would be that were asters and goldenrods on our list would be good candidates.
Great, thank you. That was very informative. And talking about plug plantings, as you mentioned before, someone asked that everything that they've read about creating native lawns and meadows starts with eliminating the existing vegetation. And they're wondering if there are any strategies that exist to supplement laws with native plants through plug plantings without having to completely eliminate the existing vegetation.
Probably not. I would recommend using some fabric to cover the area wherever you want to plant your plugs. So without using glyphosate, you would smother what's already there. You could do it in patches, and then plant once you lift the fabric and you find out that you have bare ground. But start with bare ground rather than plugging into an existing lawn.
Yeah, one of the downsides, if you think about plant competition and from the plant perspective, they're competing against each other for water, for nutrients, for sunlight. And if you don't set back what's there and then you plant into it, now everything that you just put in there has to compete with everything that was there before. And it just does not give the advantages to the native plants that you would want to see, which is probably why there aren't many experiments where people have tried to either interseed or interplug into an existing matrix. I think it's one of the reasons that our project was successful is because we started with a clean slate.
Good, that's a good point. And how long would you keep the fabric on that?
As long as you can tolerate it. So, 6 months would probably be the shortest amount of time, depending on the weather. I've found that if it's dry, like this season, I used some fabric at home, and I thought for sure it would be a bare ground in a short period of time, but I was wrong. So I think when things are dry, they really go dormant. And it's the heat and the moisture, that the combination that does a better job of killing what's under fabric.
And there's kind of two ways to think about it. There's you looking at killing the existing vegetation, and the heat and the solarization and the lack of light and water all in a combination kind of does that trick for you. But there's also trying to minimize and eliminate some of the seed bank. And in a traditional turf grass lawn, you have all of the same species and probably even a few more sitting in the seed bank waiting for that opportunity as well. And so the timing and the tarp over an area is really serving two purposes, because it's putting a dent in the seed bank. I won't say it gets rid of it, but it puts a dent in it. And some of the timing also depends on what you have there as well. We had an area, Chrissy mentioned the stream bank restoration area earlier. We had an area with crown vetch in it, and we left the fabric on that for 3 years, trying to really put a dent in the crown vetch seeds that are very long lived. So a lot of the timing depends on what the particular species are that you're trying to get rid of.
Great, thank you so much. That's so helpful. And someone had an interesting question. Have you looked at any of the species that you've mentioned for use in green roof applications?
I'm fairly certain Danthonia is already in use in green roof applications, and possibly some of the shorter penstemons. So many of the green roof applications that I know of are mostly non-native plants. But yes, it would be nice to see more natives used that way.
Thank you. And we have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to read a few more questions. Do you have any resources for help in eliminating stubborn invasives such as multiflora rose acting as long grass, or autumn olive, or yellow archangel?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the last one, but one of my favorite tools is called a parsnip predator. It is a short-handled shovel that has part of the shovel blade cut so that there's only about 2 or 3 inches wide of a cutting tool, and it works good at severing tap roots right under the ground. But it also can be used to lift up the root out of the ground for things where it's low growing. If you have an actual stem and you want to do it without herbicides, there's tools out there called weed wrenches that you can use to lever the whole plant root out if you can grab onto the stem. So those might be a couple different possible non-pesticide applications for dealing with the woody plants in a turf.
Great, thank you. And one of the last questions I'll get to today is about glyphosate. Did you have any concerns or reservations about using the glyphosate treatment, and what were the determining factors towards that choice?
We use it on, we practice IPM, integrated pest management, when possible. But given that this was an experiment, we wanted to use it as an experimental approach, because a lot of people still use it for burning down those kinds of conditions. So as long as you follow the label and have the proper personal protective equipment on, and are making sure that there's not high winds and those kinds of things, it can be applied safely, again, in an IPM strategy.
Great, thank you. And someone asked where you would find a prickly pear, as someone asked a question before mentioning it. This person's from the Adirondack area, though.
Long Island.
Long Island, okay. Okay, I think that concludes all the questions we have today. I just want to say thank you both for the presentation again. This was very informative. I bet that many people here will be using these tips. And this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the Green New York website to view once it's uploaded. And again, thank you everyone for the patience today with the tech difficulties. I am Madison again, filling in for Brendan today, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.